The population needed not to be naive like the past. That's thinking that, oh no, China will not invade Taiwan. No, it's not true. China is preparing to invade Taiwan.
The voice there of Taiwan's deputy foreign minister, the self-governing island which China views as a breakaway province, is bracing itself for war. Hi everyone, Mark here, and on the show today we're talking Trump and Taiwan. With me is Sky's Asia correspondent, Helen-Ann Smith. Welcome back.
Hi, thank you for having me again. I always like coming on.
We were talking trade last time, I think. I was in a hotel somewhere in Middle America. You were in, where were you? You were in Yiwu.
I was in Yiwu, the home of the world's largest wholesale market. And it was like 6 o'clock in the morning. We'd all worked flat out for days and days. We were mid kind of trade war agony, weren't we, at the time?
We were. And actually, I think, you know, the way that the dust has settled, for now at least, on trade, gives us somewhat of a hint, I think, of maybe how the America-China relationship might be going. And it does seem to me like China has quite a lot of backbone, has quite a lot of maybe leverage on trade. And in the foreign policy realm and in the geopolitics with Taiwan, maybe that is relevant. We will get into all of that. But you're just back from Taiwan, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. You've got a fascinating film out this week on all Sky platforms. So go and find it, everyone. We're going to examine just how close China might be to invading Taiwan. And crucially, would Trump's America come to Taiwan's defense? Does Donald Trump care about Taiwan? Helen-Ann, before we get into all that, let's hear from Trump, because there is one thing he loves to talk about over and over.
Let's say China. 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 China.
So he loves to China bash. It is the bogeyman. It is the country that brought us COVID, or the China virus, as he calls it. They stole all our jobs, all of that. But would he go to war if China was to steal Taiwan? Let's rewind, Helen-Ann. Remind us all of the history. Taiwan is the renegade province, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. It's an island. It's 200 kilometers or so off the coast of mainland China. For a couple of hundred years, from sort of 1600s to the sort of late 1800s, it was under Qing dynasty rule, which was the last sort of imperial dynasty of China. The Japanese then invaded, took it over. They then held it as a colony until 1945, the end of the Second World War. Japan lost. They handed it back to China. China then descended into its own civil war. And in 1949, and this is the really important date in sort of Taiwan's history, 1949, that civil war came to an end. The communists won, they prevailed. And the losing side in China's civil war, which was sort of the nationalist government, an organization called the Kuomintang, or the KMT, they retreated and they fled to Taiwan, about 2 million of them. And essentially ever since, it's been governed as a separate entity. But fascinatingly, even those early sort of retreaters, they always wanted to reunify China. They also saw themselves as Chinese. They also saw Taiwan as a Chinese place. But, over the decades, things have changed. China, of course, still run by the Communist Party of China. Taiwan has flourished into a kind of a brilliant, vibrant, rich democracy. And many people in Taiwan now, particularly the young, but also the middle-aged and some elderly as well, see themselves as Taiwanese, as quite a separate sort of cultural identity now. And many of them look at the sort of lack of democracy, the lack of freedom that people in China here experience. And frankly, they don't want to reunify anymore. So that's how we have this sort of complicated status quo that they currently exist with, whereby Taiwan is not officially an independent country. It doesn't officially have diplomatic relations with most countries, but it self-governs, it's democratic, and many people don't want to reunify.
Yeah, it's kind of unique in that respect, in that it isn't actually a country, although clearly it sees itself as one. It's the Republic of China is its official name, I think, and it's got an airline that's called China Airlines, I think it is, and so in so many ways it identifies as Chinese, but a very different China than the one just across a very narrow strait. Take us on your journey.
Yeah, you can fly directly. It's a pretty easy route. We essentially wanted to go to just take stock of where Taiwan is at, because there has been some really big changes in the last year to 18 months that really sort of just moved the dial a bit on where Taiwan is at. But, broadly, there is a new president in office in Taiwan. He has taken a more robust position to China. There is a new ratcheting up of tensions and pressure from China. That is really tangible and it's really happening. And then the third factor, of course, the key reason why I'm on your podcast, Mark, rather than anyone else's, is that there's a new president in the White House. And ultimately, if and when there is ever a kind of an attack from China on Taiwan or a blockade or anything, it's going to be very, very difficult for Taiwan to resist without some international help. It is tiny compared to China. It has a tiny military in comparison, a tiny economy in comparison. So it is going to need international help. And so what the Americans think and so forth is going to be very important.
And America, for many years now, has had this kind of weird policy of strategic ambiguity, which basically means, we're willing to defend Taiwan, we'll supply it with weapons, but there's no guarantee there. It's not like NATO, where one country is invaded, everyone piles in and says that they'll help that country. It's literally strategic ambiguity. But I think the difference with Trump is that for many years, over many different presidents going back decades, that behind or just underneath that policy of strategic ambiguity has been this vibe that yes, the Americans will defend Taiwan with force if necessary. I think what's happened now with Trump is it's genuinely ambiguous. I don't think anyone quite knows, because of the nature of Donald Trump. No one quite knows what he might do. And if I was to be pressed, I think, given what we've seen with Donald Trump's behavior over the past however many days it is now in his second term, I actually don't think he would, if push came to shove, defend Taiwan militarily. But then it's very hard to say because he does weave and flip-flop the whole time. But I think if you're sitting in Taipei now, I think they probably should be more worried than they have ever been.
It's a very interesting observation, and that's the key question I put to almost every single interviewee in the kind of a week or so that we spent in Taiwan, be that the deputy foreign minister of Taiwan or the kind of most ordinary kind of Joe Blogs on the street. We put exactly that question to them. If an attack were to come, do you think Donald Trump would come to your aid, and do you think that this place is more or less safe with him in the White House? And people, on the whole, said we're worried about it.
Do you feel that Donald Trump would come to your support?
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
I don't think so.
And is that quite worrying?
Yeah, we worry about it, but we cannot do anything.
With Donald Trump in the White House, do you think Taiwan is more safe or less safe?
Dangerous.
More dangerous.
More dangerous.
Some disagreed with that sentiment, but that's broadly what a lot of people said. And in Taiwan, people watched on with frankly horror to watch what happened with Trump in Ukraine and that kind of the showdown in the Oval Office with Zelensky. I think that really rattled a lot of people in Taiwan, because you're right, Mark, that strategic ambiguity is extremely important, because remember, Taiwan is not officially an independent country. China sees it as its own, and if any country, let alone America, but any country in the world, goes too far in terms of diplomatic relations with the Taiwanese administration, China sees that as an enormously provoking thing, and it responds. So countries are very, very careful in what they say and what they do with their dealings in Taiwan. Not least, president after president has been like this. But the real break with that tradition came with President Biden, because he was asked on multiple occasions, "Would you defend Taiwan?" And he said yes. And that was a big break from the norms, actually. So there are those that argue that Trump is just going back to strategic ambiguity. But as we say, Trump's ambiguity is a different type of ambiguity.
Yeah, exactly. Where he is being ambiguous is kind of front and center of his foreign policy, and actually, I do think that his sort of flip-flopping on different issues, it does leave leaders not totally sure what he might do. And so I guess the argument against what I'm saying, the argument that China wouldn't risk invading Taiwan, is that Xi Jinping just doesn't quite know where he stands with Trump. But I think, in a sense, Trump has shown his cards so much. I mean, he talks about being a peacemaker, doesn't want war, that if you're sitting in Beijing, then maybe you think, well, I could do this because he doesn't want war. He wants to win the Nobel Peace Prize. He's not going to get involved in all of this. So it's really fascinating.
I could argue with you about why that assessment could be wrong, though, because there's quite a lot of indicators that he would have a very strong interest in defending Taiwan, or at least getting involved to some degree. Because there is a lot more that Taiwan has that Donald Trump, or indeed any president of the United States, wants, and we'll get into that. But as a sort of side issue, which I think is also extremely important, I think there might be a degree to which Donald Trump won't want to see China prevail in that way, because a retaking of Taiwan for China would be just truly the greatest victory for China. It would be the kind of the fulfillment of long held dreams. It would be financial. It would be sort of, as long as it wasn't as a result of a deeply costly war, it'd be economically enormously beneficial, and defense wise as well. Just the geography of the island in terms of where it is, in terms of trade routes, in terms of the first island chain, which is this kind of geographical buffer of islands that are all at the moment sort of broadly allied to the US. So that break from that would be really important for China. And you have to ask whether Trump would want to see China prevail in that sort of way. And he's a competitive, strong man. I have doubt about that too.
Okay, but here's the thing. So the first island chain, I get it. Really important. Japan and the Philippines are the other islands, a natural barrier, allies to the United States. Like if China was to take Taiwan, you could see them encroaching eastward, and then they could use that strategically to threaten the United States. But if you are sitting in rural Missouri or somewhere like that as a middle American, you have not got the first clue what the first island chain is. It just doesn't matter to you. And I think one of the problems is that I don't think the American political establishment, whether it be under Biden or under Trump now, has really explained to the American people why strategically China not invading Taiwan is important. And so I think that therein it lies the problem. And Trump, more than any other president, relies on his base. And I just wonder whether they actually care at all about Taiwan. I mean, we've seen how they've reacted to the fact that Trump seems to have shifted a bit on Ukraine, now supplying weapons in greater numbers or selling them to the Europeans. He seems to have recognized that Putin is an old Russian rogue and not maybe the guy you can do a deal with. And the base in America has reacted against that. What are we doing? This is not our war. That you could apply exactly the same, I think, to Taiwan.
Perhaps this is the moment we should talk about chips, though, because the reason it might matter to domestic America is because Taiwan has one absolutely crucial asset: semiconductors. They are the crucial computer chips that power the entire modern world. They're in our phones, they're in our computers, they're in our weaponry, our robots, our AI technology, our cars, they're in everything. And it is really the key reason why the West might come to its defense. It is the key reason why middle Americans would be deeply affected if there was a sort of devastating war in Taiwan, and certainly if China sort of took control of this particular industry. Taiwan has absolutely perfected the art of manufacturing these semiconductor chips, and Taiwan makes 90% of the world's most advanced semiconductor chips, and they're vital. Without them, economies will slow down and technological advance will be deeply harmed. So Trump, this again, it might not appeal to middle Americans, but all Americans need semiconductor chips for everything they want to buy. And if that industry were to somehow be disrupted, it will have enormous implications on the functioning of the modern world. Really, it is as serious as that. And if that whole industry were to come under China's control, another reason why Trump might act it, I mean, there's no way that in a strategic kind of competitive the competitive reality that China and America find themselves in, there is just no way that a president of the United States is going to want to see that enormously powerful industry in the hands of the Chinese, particularly as recently the Chinese have shown very clearly that they can put strangleholds on industries when they want to. And I think it would be a very nerve-wracking position for the Americans if the Chinese had control of that industry.
So Donald Trump is a guy who likes to make a deal. He's also a guy who likes peace, which is laudable, of course. But is there a world in which he can, once he's solved Gaza, once he's solved Ukraine, and all of that, is there a world in which he can do a deal with Xi Jinping, with Taiwan, to somehow make that work, a peaceful transfer, like coexistence, like Hong Kong, one country, two systems? Is there a system that he can create, the deal maker in chief?
That is a fascinating question, and one that I think the Chinese would be unbelievably open to. No, look, let's be clear about this. China doesn't really want an expensive, costly, damaging, isolating war. It doesn't. It's watched what's happened to Russia. It values its position on the international stage. It does not want to be economically or geopolitically isolated. It's got the biggest army in the world, but it's actually an army that has never fought a war. So there's a lot of questions over the experience and kind of quality, if you like, of the army. It's sort of untested. So they don't really want a war. They would love a deal. They would love a deal, and it would be an absolute gift to Xi Jinping to be able to use Taiwan as a bargaining chip within some sort of grander deal with the Americans. And I think there's a lot of people in Taiwan who worry very, very, very deeply that that's a bargaining chip that Donald Trump would be willing to bring to the table. So I think they're probably working very hard behind the scenes to try and ensure that that is never the case. Because look, one thing we've not talked about much yet, but is worth mentioning, is that, China in recent months and recent years, but particularly in recent months, since the new president came into office just over a year ago in Taiwan, has really ratcheted up these so-called grey zone incursions. So these are sort of these slow incremental changes, slow incremental incursions that essentially just slowly but surely move the dial on what's normal. They sort of test the boundaries of international norms. They slowly chip away at Taiwan's resolve. And the idea is that they sort of slowly clear the path for themselves so that if attack or blockade or whatever were to come, it's just easier for them. They've just sort of cleared the way a bit. And they do this by sending Coast Guard ships sort of increasingly closer, sort of intimidating fishermen. They send jets to fly kind of sort of towards Taiwanese airspace. But those are sort of the big obvious ones. The sort of the less obvious stuff is the kind of the pro-China influences, the massive Chinese investment in Taiwanese businesses in sort of broadly more conservative areas, the fact that the Chinese will be much more willing and more quick to buy produce from regions of Taiwan that have a more conservative voting tendencies or more sort of China-leaning voting tendencies. So, this slowly push of influence to try and sort of persuade people. They want to persuade. They don't really want to attack. But look, from where Taiwan is standing, you can't overemphasize how modern Taiwanese, broadly, the very vast majority of them do not want reunification. Most of them, when you ask, feel Taiwanese. They might support the status quo because they don't want to provoke China. They don't want a war. They want to continue to live their free, democratic, happy lives. But they don't want reunification. And so this kind of effort to try and persuade the Taiwanese, I don't think it's working that well for Xi Jinping at the moment.
And we know that the one country, two systems thing hasn't quite worked out all that well as it would turn out in Hong Kong.
Indeed. And the Taiwanese quote it all the time. They say, look what happened to Hong Kong. Why on earth would we want that? They bring it up all the time. And why wouldn't they?
And actually, when you go to Taiwan, when you spend time there, it actually feels like they are genuinely preparing for war, doesn't it?
It really does. And it really feels like the urgency of that preparation has really stepped up a gear. I've reported from Taiwan multiple times, and this time something really did feel different. And I think it's partly because the new administration has opted to be more robust, but also because I think the Chinese, in their sort of increased incursions, both military and grey zone, have given them more reason to feel that they need to get themselves prepared. So we started our film, actually we traveled to, people don't often know this, but Taiwan's actually a series of islands, not just one big one, even though the one big one is the most famous. But Some of the outer lying islands are going to be absolutely crucial if there ever were an attack, because they're going to be early, easy targets for the Chinese. They're difficult to defend, sort of strategically important. So we traveled to one of them, the island of Penghu. It's a beautiful archipelago about 50 kilometers into the Taiwan Strait. And we went there to witness essentially what are being called these big mass civil resilience drills. And essentially what they are is these big exercises to try and teach local communities to be ready.
This is an attack on a critical port on the Taiwanese island of Penghu. It is a race to respond and to contain what damage they can.
So we saw this big attack on a critical port. There's sort of faked explosions and sort of casualties lying around, and the emergency services are there, and there's smoke, and they're kind of trying to triage people and get them to hospital and whatnot. But they're also practicing sort of civilian logistics as well. So the handout of food and supplies, if there's a blockade, 7,000 people on this archipelago are going to need food, and where are they going to go, and how are you going to prove which families have had what, and all that sort of stuff. So we really got a sense when we were there that there was these observers from the central government in Taipei who had come to watch these drills. And some of their feedback was scathing, really, because some of the sort of preparation, it all felt quite performative. And the observers said it just isn't good enough. You need to ramp this right up and take this seriously. And so we came away with a real sense like, wow, the central government are serious about this now, and they are doing their best to really try to convey that seriousness to the local communities who, frankly, have lived with this threat for so many decades. That complacency is just easy, isn't it? It's such a part of life to be aware that threat exists in Taiwan. That I think there is a sense that needs to change.
When I was based in Beijing 8 years ago or so, I was there for 3 years, and we didn't do one story in Taiwan. There was no urgency. I went to Taiwan on holiday, but we never did a story about it, because back then, not all that long ago, it was not seen as something that was about to happen. China was not about to invade Taiwan. It was always way down the line. And yet you have been there multiple times, because it is now genuinely a threat and a concern. And 2027 seems to be the date that everyone is now focusing on.
That's right, because reportedly Xi Jinping has asked his troops to be ready.
He's
for
the Chinese
invasion.
president.
The Chinese president, Xi Jinping, the man, importantly, under whom the sort of long-held dream of reunification has really been turbocharged. Xi Jinping has put this quote at the core of his core interests. It is clearly a deeply important legacy issue for him, and under his tenure, preparation for this has really ramped up, and as have sort of military action and incursions and so on and so forth. But reportedly, he's asked his troops to be ready for invasion by 2027. Now, that doesn't mean invasion will happen in 2027, and most observers think it won't. But it's important that they're setting those dates, and that's just not something that was seen 5 to 10 years ago. It just isn't. And we spoke about the grey zone incursions earlier, and I think all of that is part of the preparation. And that's, I think, how we need to look at this now. The Chinese, as we heard from the Deputy Foreign Minister right at the beginning of this recording, they are preparing for invasion. Their military drills have taken on a new sophistication in recent times, where they are practicing actively for blockade. They're not just firing a few missiles and flying a few jets in that direction. They are sophisticated, real rehearsal style drills, and it's alarming for those who watch this closely. It might not come this year or next year or in 2027 or even in 2028, but I think the chances of it coming at some point are seriously increasing, and the Taiwanese know that they need to be ready.
And at the heart of it all, two powerful leaders, Xi Jinping and Donald Trump, both keen on cementing their legacy. And it seems from what you're saying that a key part of Xi Jinping's legacy is reunification, is getting the renegade province back. A key part of Donald Trump's legacy is peace. But he says it's peace through strength. How will he use that? Fascinating conversation, Helen-Ann. Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, go and find the film that Helen-Ann and her team have made. It's really fascinating, and it is available on all Sky News platforms.
Thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed it.